Today we're at the Mill Stream on Mill Road in Chelmsford, and we have Mr. Lloyd Greene, who is the owner of this property, and he's going to give us a tour of the place and show us what he's doing here. Mr. Greene, will you take over from here?
All right, thank you. Welcome to the Mill Stream. The Mill Stream is one of the oldest historic sites in the town of Chelmsford, and it came from a king's grant known as the Adams Grant on July 3rd, 1656. Now we are going to conduct you on a tour of the grounds and the mill itself. You are watching the water coming from the gatehouse on the extreme right rear of the picture. That's the small little red building beyond the bridge. The water coming down through the waterfall is being released by a small gate located underneath the gatehouse. The large building in the center of the view is the mill house. Now, on this exact spot where you're seeing it now was the original Adams Mill, built in 1656. And the foundation size is approximately the same today as it was then, because when we excavated here to build the new mill, we found the foundation, parts of the old foundation, and so we were able to trace out the size, and in that manner, we were able to put the new mill really on top of where the old mill was, except build it in a little more modern fashion. The central spillway is to the left of the mill, and you will see that the water wheel is in progress of being constructed on the left side of the mill. This is a large steel water wheel, approximately 12 foot 6 inches in diameter and 52 inches wide. This water wheel, when operating, will provide approximately 10 kilowatts of electricity per hour and develop about 16 horsepower. That is provided we have enough water flow to give us that amount of power. Naturally, the rate of the flow is determined by the amount of rainfall and the water coming down the valley. At this moment, we have a flow which would approximate about 8 kilowatts per hour. Each morning at 8 o'clock, we measure the flow of the water and the temperature and the weather conditions generally, and keep a log on the dam and the positions of all the gates in the dam.
Does this come from the mill pond up above?
Now this water is stored in what is known on the map as the Russell's Mills Pond.
I see.
And this water comes from a small valley of about 10 square miles by U.S. Army Engineer Survey.
Now, if you would explain what these two objects are here for us, we'd appreciate that.
These are two large granite millstones, and while unfortunately they didn't come from the Adams Mill site, there being none here, I went looking and finally were able to locate these two in Tewksbury, Mass. These were part of the old Brett Mill about 1845 in Tewksbury, which is now a housing area. And so I was able to get these from a descendant of the original owner. These are in very good condition because usually when millstones are old, they're worn very thin. Obviously, these stones are quite thick, and so therefore they've had little use. And the story goes with it that the mill burned down before these stones had been used much. So that's why they're so nice and thick and such good appearance. In here, this is the lower stone, and this is the upper stone. In the lower stone, there are lands and grooves. And there's a large hole here through which the grain was fed into the stonework. Now, these stones would be much closer together when they're operating. One would be just above the other, turning. The bottom stone never turns. It stays still. Now, the hole on top is known as the eye of the damsel. These are some of the old terms from the olden days of milling. And the top stone would be slowly turning, and the grain would emanate from the grooves here and fall into a trough underneath.
And all the surrounding towns, the farmers brought their grain?
All the people in Chelmsford and some of the surrounding settlements brought their grain here to be ground. And one of the little anecdotes is that on Thursday was to be set aside for the people from Dunstable. So if you came from Dunstable and you brought your grain here on a Thursday, you would be served first.
All right. Was your house here originally, or is this something you put up?
No, this house was not here originally. And I selected this particular spot and had to fill in some of the land. Part of this was swamp originally. On the part on the left here, the main part of the house, was the old ice house that was here for many years. And so this house was built in three parts. The first part was built in 1954 and 5, and then the middle part was built about 1960, and the small addition on the end was built about 1966. And we call this the main house.
Can we go up now and see the original part of the dam and the falls?
Yes, we'll now go to the upper part where the pond is and the mill.
Good. Okay, now tell us what these buildings are all about.
Well, the little building that you're viewing now with the porch and the two chairs is the well house, and sometimes we call it the doll's house, because it's kind of cute. Actually, its main purpose is to be a protection and cover for the artesian well that was drilled beneath it before the building was constructed. The artesian well goes down 260 feet and produces sparkling diamond clear water, and it's been tested and it has a very high test rating. The building that's to the right of the well house is the boathouse, and used to store some equipment and supplies, and we do have one small boat so that we can get around the pond to pick up debris sometimes, loose logs or whatever. And then the little building across the pond is known as the gatehouse, and the gatehouse is the control gatehouse to let the water out, which you saw in a previous scene. And the large building in the center is the mill house itself, which on this actually very same site was constructed in 1656 by Captain Adams and his men.
And your dream is to eventually have electric power from all of this?
Yes. Instead of trying to reproduce the grist mill part, which would not be practical today, or the sawmill part, we're going to use the water power to develop electricity.
Ah, great.
Which everybody refers to as hydro.
Yes. When you mentioned the pond, how large a pond is it?
The Russell's Mills Pond, by government survey, is approximately 1.5 miles long of clear water, and then it proceeds into some very large swamps, of which Tophet Swamp is one of them.
I see.
And these water rights extend from here, Mill Road, all the way to the old dam that's in Carlisle on the State Park Reservation.
Oh, for goodness sake, that is a long distance.
So it runs for a very considerable distance, and Route 4 cuts across approximately the middle of the length of the mill pond.
Then eventually the water will go down those two sloughs?
Yes.
Is that what I call them?
Well,
I don't know.
The three openings that you see in the middle of the dam is known as the central spillway. And the one on the left nearest the mill is closed at present, and that will be where the water enters the forebay to run the Waterwheel.
I see.
And the second and third openings, which are not in position, they're being painted right now, they will be for overflow water in case of a flood.
Well, now, we've had quite an interesting tour. I wonder if you have any little stories you can tell us about the historical parts of this with the Indians and so forth. You've been relating some to me. I'd like the people to hear a little about it. Want to take the mic?
Yes. Well, in going back to the early settling of the mill stream here, which was the Adams Grant called at that time, July 3rd, 1656 was the official date when the town granted this water right to Captain Adams. And he settled here with his wife and two daughters. And he had two daughters. Their names were Rebecca and Susanna. And in due course of time, these two girls married two brothers. And the brothers just happened to be the two sons of the minister of the town, known as Deacon Waldo. And as a result of these two marriages, John married Rebecca, and Daniel married Susanna. Now, about John and Rebecca, John was wounded in a fight with the Indians, working with the militia, in Brookfield, Mass., as I recall it. And because of the wounds he received in this Indian fight, he died 2 or 3 years later of what the term then was a malingering wound. And as a result of that, Rebecca, of course, became a widow. And some years later, she married the schoolmaster of Chelmsford, Edward Emerson. And that would be about 1695, according to the history of the town of Chelmsford. Their firstborn was named in deference to her first husband, and this is how the name Waldo Emerson came into being. I don't remember exactly the firstborn son's name. It might have been Edward Waldo Emerson. But many years later, in Concord, Mass., some of the Emersons evidently had moved to Concord, and as a result of this union, we finally come to Ralph Waldo Emerson,
for goodness
which is a descendant of the Chelmsford Emersons. And now as to Susanna and her husband, they built a small mill in North Chelmsford, approximately where the Gillette scouring mills are or were,
Yeah.
And then they, for some reason or other, sold out and went to was Dorchester, Mass. And then from Dorchester, Mass, they went to what was then known as North Bridgewater.
Yeah.
Now, there is no North Bridgewater today because it's the city of Brockton. Yeah. And the Waldo family there married into the famous Fields family, and they were big in the shoe business many years ago. And as a result of that union, this Daniel Waldo Field left a very beautiful park to the city of Brockton, which is there for everybody to go and see today. And this is a very large park for a small city to own. And so it's rather unique when you think that from these two sisters came these two great lines of lineage of the Emersons on the one hand and the Waldo Fields on the other hand, and all from this mill site.
Now, did you tell me, too, that at one time they had to have the mill guided? What reason was that?
Well, back in the early days, they used to have what they call skulking Indians, Indians who would be in the woods here and probably would attack if they saw an opportune time, either the settlers or destroy their buildings, because they were known to burn crops and burn buildings when they got the opportunity. So this mill site was known as a garrison, and Mrs. Adams was the head of it at the time. It's possible that Captain Adams had passed away at that time, and so she became the head, and they stationed 2 soldiers here to help her guard the place along with the mill hands that would be here anyways. And so actually this was known as a garrison site.
How interesting. I hope everyone is finding this as interesting as I am, and we'll go inside now and see how the mill inside works and all the interior. We are now on the bottom of the mill house, which doesn't mean much to me, but I'm going to have Mr. Greene explain all of this to you. Now tell us about all of this contraption in front of us here.
Well, you're looking at what we call the gear pit. On the outside of the building, you've previously been shown the wheel pit, where the big steel water wheel will be. Well, this is just immediately inside the mill, opposite the water wheel. And this large gear that you're looking at is the master gear. Now, this master gear is 66 inches in diameter, and it's 6 inches wide, weighs 1,720 pounds. And it's mounted on a shaft that's about 12 feet long. The shaft weighs 1,100 pounds. And the shaft is mounted in 2 large bearings. Each bearing weighs 160 pounds. Now, this large gear drives a small pinion gear mounted on the side of this green gearbox. Now, this gearbox will step the speed way up because the water wheel turns rather slow. The water wheel will turn about 9.5 revolutions per minute. The large gear then will turn the small gear at 57 revolutions per minute, and the gearbox will then step up the shaft on the outside over there to approximately 600 RPM. Then there's a 2-foot pulley that goes on that shaft and a small pulley on the generator, which is missing, will be bought next year, and that will bring the generator speed up to 1,800 RPM when we're generating power. And the generator will be approximately 10 kilowatts, 240 volts, 3-line AC output.
Will this be all just for your own use, or will you be able to sell it?
This initial, this is what I call Unit 1. Like some of the big power plants, they have Unit 1, Unit 2. This will be Unit 1, and this will be the small one. This will be 10 kilowatts. And the power from this will be pumped into the Massachusetts electric power lines, the grid as they call it. But we have a 2-way meter, and that means that under the federal law, we will be permitted to pump in the electricity from this unit into their lines and take it back as we need it. However, at the end of every month, the light company will read the meter, and if there's any electricity owed them, we will have to pay for it. And if we pump extra electricity in and don't take that much back, they will keep it for free. This is their rent for using their storage lines.
I see.
So this is why this unit here will be basically used by the buildings on the mill stream for heat, light, power, and whatever.
I see. And when do you expect to have this all completed?
Well, this Unit 1 should be in operation about 1 year from today, and this is October 1984.
Okay, we'll be back in October of 1985 and show you the results of it all. And thank you very much for having us here. It's been an enjoyable time.
You're quite welcome.